I think it comes as no surprise based on the president's comments over the last few days. We're leading today talking about the potential deployment of National Guard troops to Chicago. Now, this is coming off of his big crime push in D.C., which, to be quite frank, I think has been more successful than liberals wanted to give Trump credit for in the beginning. But Chicago was a very different story. So let's start here. Does the president have legal justification to send troops into Chicago?
The answer is that it depends.
Okay.
Unlike with D.C., where D.C. is a federal district and the Constitution itself specifically gives the president policing powers, the last 50 years of home rule have been historically anomalous, and that's why Trump is trying to reclaim that power back. Using federal troops in other cities is a very different legal question. So part of the reason why the Trump administration has relied so much on ICE is because ICE is one of the forms of federal law enforcement that you need very little justification to deploy. And especially when the stated policy of many of these sanctuary states is to not comply with federal immigration law. So it fully depends. You have something like the Insurrection Act, which you can trigger if you're saying that you've organized groups trying to defy federal law. And there is the case to be made that that is happening, right? Specifically the immigration issue, but also if you have, gang violence is a huge element that you could trigger justification of federal troops. You can't use federal troops to go after individuals acting alone, right? There are limitations there, and that is where Trump could really be kept up in court if the troops try and go after, let's say, an individual performing a violent carjacking, right? Unfortunately, that's not actually the purview if it's not gang violence. So it's very specific, and it's why you have some civil libertarians being wary about this. The legal question, it's open. If it's done well and done, with precision, it can stand the constitutional muster. From a political perspective, that's the whole ball game.
Right.
Democrats were raising hell over the D.C. National Guard deployment, which had none of the legal questions, right? There was not really any civil libertarian argument to be made about it. And the consequence has been, you arrest 1,700 people and it changes an entire city. Because we know for a fact that a lot of the feelings of chaos, that would be metro crime, public park crime, these are all repeat serial offenders. It's not like a bunch of people are committing violent crimes. And as we've talked about, disproportionately, the majority of the homicide victims are poor and black, and the majority of them live in the poorest wards of D.C. We went 2 weeks without a murder. When's the last time we've done that?
Not in the 12 years that I've lived here in D.C., that's for sure, yeah.
So my question is, other than Orange Man bad, what is the argument against this? Does the left, does the Democratic Party, do the abundance liberals, do any of them have an affirmative alternative to what Trump is doing that isn't just the status quo is fine and you can have 58 people shot Labor Day weekend in Chicago?
To be quite frank, there hasn't been a viable counterargument from Democrats about why, not necessarily mobilization of the National Guard troops themselves, but why the crackdown on crime is either focused in the wrong direction or illegal, which again, shout out the Home Rule Act. We know Donald Trump is acting within his legal powers as the executive in D.C., but I want to look at, someone who has been, to be quite frank, maligned by both the left and the right throughout her entire political career, but I think is sort of operating in a way to where Democrats can sort of take some guidance from, and that's D.C.'s Mayor Muriel Bowser. I've had plenty of problems with her in the past, but she's been put in...
I've crashed her maskless wedding.
There you go. Yeah, I forgot about that. Go read washingtonexaminer.com. But Bowser was basically, between a rock and a hard place with Donald Trump. On the one hand, she had to deal with the realities of violent crime in the district. Included in that is this whole scandal with the DC PD, the Metropolitan Police Department, about them falsifying their crime statistics to make the city feel safer than it was. On the other side of that argument, she's got the incredibly progressive DC electorate who wanted to see her come out on that first day in August and tell President Trump, no, we're not going to cooperate with you. And she did the complete opposite. She essentially said, look, this is an extraordinary circumstance. This has never happened before. And while that is true, we do know that any crime is too much crime, right? And in the ensuing weeks, she's come out and she has corroborated the ways that they're working with the federal government. These arrests and seizures of narcotics and firearms off the streets.
45% reduction in DC violent crime. I would call that a pretty categorical success.
Well, no, I think so too. And to be quite frank, the city has sort of started to take her lead. Like there was a huge protest over the weekend, you know, pushing back on Trump doing anything essentially.
And DC's population is 44% black. You would not know it if you saw these protests.
Well, that's sort of my point.
It's all white boomers. It's not even young people.
I think there's a disconnect between, we'll call them the liberal elites, for lack of a better term, the East Coast ivory tower educated folks who move to the cities and have high-paying white-collar jobs in private industry or in government, and the people who actually live in the cities, regardless of their race, regardless of their socioeconomic standings. Because two things can be true, right? Donald Trump can be operating in a way which we've never seen and flirting with, again, depending on how it's received from the mayor of Chicago, the governor of Illinois, or the executives of any of these other states across the country that don't have the D.C. Home Rule Act, where Donald Trump can just come in and militarize the police department. He can be right on that, he can be operating beyond the traditional bounds of the presidency, but he can also be right that people in cities on the East Coast, on the West Coast, in the North, in the South, are concerned about crime, which has elevated in the 5 years since COVID. And there are tons of socioeconomic issues that, you know, account for that crime spike, but that doesn't mean we should just let it become the new status quo. So I'm curious to see, because I think I hate to, you know, I'm putting on my cynic cap for a second. I think it was kind of a brilliant piece of political maneuvering from Trump to go back to the well and lean into an issue, which, to be quite frank, in 2024 wasn't as big of an issue as it was in the 2020 election, and find a way to re-weaponize that and put Democrats on the back foot. Because to your question, how can you as a Democrat say, I don't want to tackle crime just because Donald Trump's doing it? It's a losing argument. That being said, we are now seeing, and when we talked about Chicago, we've talked about D.C., and of course Donald Trump has talked about doing this in New York and in L.A. as well, him potentially sending in troops to red states now. He's talked about New Orleans the other day.
Which 100% endorse.
There was a horrific stabbing of a Ukrainian refugee in Charlotte, North Carolina, which, again, not a red state, but certainly a purple state. Last month, the video of that stabbing has now been released to the public or leaked to the public. Why do you think this one specific incident became such a flashpoint over the weekend for conservatives trying to back up the president's push?
So, DeCarlos Brown was arrested for first-degree murder of Irina Zarutska. She was a Ukrainian woman, only 23 years old. She came here after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. DeCarlos Brown is a textbook career criminal. If MAGA wanted to ask ChatGPT to generate, you know, how do we cut a viral video that proves our point, that Soros prosecutors let career criminals, one of those 1,700 that is responsible for, 90% of DC's violent crime, but in this case in Charlotte, it would be this. So his career of crime begins in 2007. In the 7 years after 2007, he is arrested 6 times for various crimes. Then, in 2014, he is arrested for armed robbery, serves 5 years in prison, released. When he's released, a few months later, he's arrested for assaulting his sister. The same month, he's arrested for a separate bout of property damage and trespassing. As recently as January, charged with misusing 911, and he was released without bail, pending trial. He's a walking, marinara ocean of red flags, of someone that you would think, like, this person needs to be in prison until we can reconcile whatever mental health crisis there is, if there is any. Otherwise, you cannot rehabilitate someone like this. without there being a serious mental health intervention if that's necessary. And then he finally just murders this woman. And the video itself, it's textbook cold-blooded murder. There's no interaction between these two people. So obviously, it's a very visual way to prove the point. But I think it's more so the reaction that I would hope wakes up some on the left to realizing we should be on the same team here. One of the biggest reactions I heard was, why was a young girl alone on the subway late at night? Or, this is why you should never take the subway. When if you are a liberal urbanist, if you believe in like the no-car future and 15-minute city and all the things like a lot of like, especially the abundance folks like, the point should be that public goods should be safe and usable and pleasant for everyone. And that includes women late at night, and that also includes children. The subway should be safe for a young 23-year-old girl to come home late at night. Could you imagine telling someone that lives in the suburbs, how would a 23-year-old drive home from work on her own? No, that would be crazy. And the difference is we subsidize subways and light rails because we consider it somewhat of a public good. So this is how you get white flight. This is how you get, Republicans and rich people running away from the cities. If we believe in American cities and urbanism as a powerful economic engine, which I do, right? I'm not someone that lives in a McMansion 50 miles outside of D.C.
She's lying. It's like 45 miles outside of D.C. I'm just kidding. It's a very nice house.
So I would hope that response, that the gut instinct that half the population has of, I wouldn't even take this up. Like, Christian, tell me honestly, how many people do you know in D.C. who are nominally liberal who have said to you, you take the metro? I don't take the metro. I haven't taken the metro in years. Because I can think of a dozen people off the top of my head that have told me that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even have a number for that. And I think that's because, again, the statistics don't always match the reality. I'm not going to actually argue with anything you said, but I think the reason this violent stabbing, again, really, if you watch the video, it makes no sense. You see this gentleman get on, you see a few minutes later, a few stops later, the victim get on, and he just straight up pulls out a knife and stabs her.
They never make eye contact.
No, he's sitting behind her.
Yeah.
I'm wearing my cynic cap right now. I think the reason, or one of the reasons this was pushed so hard over the weekend is because of the region, quite frankly. Again, D.C., very liberal city, virtually no electoral impact. Chicago, that's not going to be a Republican win. New Orleans is a weird state. California, whatever. New York, whatever. North Carolina, Charlotte, North Carolina.
It is purple. It voted for Trump.
It is purple, and it's going to be one of the most crucial Senate races in 2026. I think MAGA acolytes, whatever you want to call them, one of the reasons they've been on the offensive so hard is because the likely two candidates in that race, former Governor Roy Cooper on the Democratic side and former state Republican chairman, former RNC national chairman Michael Whatley on the Republican side, Republicans want to make this a closer race than the polls are currently showing. Like, Whatley is a known figure, but Cooper, for all the talk that Republicans put out there about like the bathroom bills and all that stuff, he balanced the budget. He isn't that progressive in the full spectrum of Democratic lawmakers.
He's not Zoran. He's not trying to nationalize the grocery stores.
And he is very popular. I think he left office like 15 to 20 points above water on his job approval. So this is an uphill climb for Republicans, and I do think that's sort of one of the reasons why it's feeding the social media machine.